Well, good morning, good evening, um, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Um, we're happy to provide this sort of daily roundup of today's events for this World Investment Forum. I am John Dilliard from St. Francis College in Brooklyn, New York, and a member of the Academy of International Business, and happy to step in for Jeremy Clegg. If those of you who are hoping to see Jeremy, he is otherwise indisposed, and he has asked me and Sasha Zhao to take his place, filling, well, he has big shoes to fill, and we'll do our best to do that. Just sort of just introducing myself, Sasha, you can go ahead too, and then Lilac, and then I guess we'll start with something. You are muted.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Yeah, sure. But I see Ari's here as well, who's the mind behind this session. So Ari, do you want to say something first before?
Sure. Let me actually start very quickly. So thank you, John, for starting off. I was following the wrong link. Welcome all to the Academic Daily Roundup. So this is an initiative that was started by Amelia Santos Paulino and her team, where the idea was that at the end of the day, when you've all seen different panels on different topics, that we come back and we briefly discuss some of the issues that have been discussed, but then dig deeper in some of these issues, taking a bit of an academic lens. And so it's my real pleasure that actually for this first academic roundup session, we have three leading international business experts on areas related to sustainability and international business. So indeed, so the first person we have is Lilac Nahum, and so Lilac is a professor of international business at City University, New York, and she's currently a Fulbright scholar to Africa, located at the Strathmore Business School in Kenya right now. So thanks for joining us today. She's been doing some excellent work recently on equitable value distribution in global value chains. So if you have any questions about these issues, certainly put that in the chat. And then indeed, I mean, I'm also very happy that John Dilliard and Sasha Zhao joined us as well. So not only because they did indeed replace Jeremy Clegg, but also because they are the co-chairs of the Sustainability Special Interest Group at the Academy of International Business. So they're really spearheading the initiative at the Academy of International Business of trying to strengthen our research on sustainability issues. So John has introduced himself. He's professor at St. Francis College in the United States. And so he's been doing a lot of work on issues related to climate change and how this relates to international business. And then Sasha is associate professor at the University of Surrey, and also has been doing a lot of work on innovation and how this links to sustainability, among many, many other topics as well. So I'm going to leave it here. The whole idea of this session is that it is informal. What I mean with this is there are no real formal presentations. Of course, the three scholars will give some initial remarks, but at any moment that you have questions, these questions do come into the chat, and we can certainly go into those. If at certain moments, John and Sasha, you agree or disagree, you can follow up on each other without a problem. So the more discussion and chat, the merrier. I'll leave the floor to the three of you.
Great, thanks, Ari.
John, will you start?
Sure. So, not to be biased, but I am somewhat biased. I thought the most fascinating part of today was the last session on the one special AIB panel on aligning M&Es for a decade of action. Mostly because it not only encapsulated in some part some of the earlier discussions, but is also more action focused, I think, on it, and bringing out things that really what could M&Es actually be doing? And connected to what they could be doing is how investment flows can encourage that on there, and what would be needed to sort of, I guess, help the infrastructure. By implication, what would be helpful for the infrastructure for those flows to occur on that. My own preference in any of these kinds of discussions is more, what it can actually be done on here, and what good positive steps should be taken by the actors who can most influence steps towards sustainable development and the achievement of the sustainable development goals, and in dealing with climate change on here. So some of the stuff in the morning with stock exchanges and sustainable stock exchange and why it's important and sustainable reporting are all sort of the underpinnings of some of that stuff. Yeah, you need to have a sustainable stock exchange to identify firms that are engaged in this. You need to have metrics that help an investor decide which of those firms are actually doing some things, make the firms provide the information that can help investors understand what's going on. So all of that's important. All that needs to be developed. It has been developing for a while. It keeps on getting better for that. Firms have to get better about what they're reporting. There has to be more transparency with all of that. And sometimes they may need to be coaxed in doing that, some balance between regulation and so on. So just sort of the way this was brought all together, I thought in the AIB panel is that there was sort of talk about Bruno Verhoeven, I think it was, Vermosen, was talking about how particular industry in the European Union, the appliances, was taking it upon themselves to do some more thinking about it. And he called something, mentioned collective systems, and then there was something that he referred to as societal centricity drivers, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing, which meant that you, as a company, need to be attuned to what society needs and help society do that. And it's a rethinking of the business model that is done. So for an example is that, what do you do with the stuff you sell? White goods are big appliances, washer, dryers, things like that. What do you do when it's no longer needed? Do you just throw it out, waste it, or do you figure out as the producer of that thing something that can be done? Do you take it upon yourself to help with the recycle or reuse of those materials? So that it's a different mindset, I think, with that. Wang Yi was talking about how, in this panel, how you can provide, how you can best provide market-driven incentives for green innovation on here, and that perhaps a regional focus or local focus is best for that, knowing what's going on in that. Carl Savant talked about how all of this can be encouraged through better ways to incentivize FDI, and maybe through FDI treaties would help for doing that. And I'm missing somebody. Oh, and Alejandra was referring to also how in Latin America, there's, it's a region. There are a lot of regional effects on that. And what's happening is being cognizant that there are regional differences in firms' needs and societal needs can help think about where investments should be done and what the role of the private sector should be in those different things. So that's, in a way, it's much more action. The whole panel, I thought, was much more action oriented on that, and made us think about, okay, what is it that firms can do? What would help do firms need? What incentives do firms need? What's the role of government in providing those incentives, or maybe even or stepping back from, how can firms and governments and society collaborate on achieving sustainable development. It's kind of the summation of what I got out of that particular session. So, yield the floor to someone else.
Okay, I'm willing. I'm happy to take over. Yeah. So I think I would summarize my takeaway of the day in around two major themes that I saw kind of running throughout, and I think that it seems to me that we can very directly relate them to the to the zeitgeist of our time, particularly the corona, but also the increasing environmental challenges. So one of is a collaboration. That collaboration of different sort, of different kinds, and collaboration is a word that we have been chewing for decades. But I feel that the recent events, but the shock of the corona and the increasingly growing and very rapidly growing concerns regarding the environment had made us much more realize that we are all in this together, and we need, in order to solve those issues, we need to collaborate both across countries and between the private and public sector, and all so to speak non-traditional forms of collaboration. Even I thought such a thing like the UNSSE is an initiative that I kind of think, well, it's by now it's almost a decade old, or about a decade old. But it's something that in the past we could not even imagine would happen. Yeah, such form of collaboration between the public. It's even more than collaboration; it's just blurring the boundaries between public and private sectors in a very positive way. And we have, while we have always known that as the world is becoming more and more global, we will need more of the help of the international organizations, and we need more of them collaborate to create forms for collaboration on a global level. I think the recent events of the corona and global climate and environmental concerns have made this vivid and brought it to our attention in a very new way, and in a much more explicit way than I could sense ever before. So that was one theme that I was kind of see was cutting through the sessions of the day. The second was technology. And here again, and nothing new about that, of course, but we know that the experience of Corona sort of gave such a huge boost for that, and sort of rushed us through into the future in this regard, and sort of jumped us into the future, probably leapfrogging decades of development that would have taken place without it. So that too creates a very, very different set of dynamics. Now, I think both issues represent different and new challenges at the policy level, both at the national and the international levels. So the rise of FDI technology, which is, as we all know by now, by far the fastest growing form of FDI, really represents a very different kind of policy challenges. What exactly does it mean that a company in one country sells something in another, and where jurisdiction lie anymore, where the borders of national sovereignty, all those issues become so obscure and unclear in a digital world. And these were issues that were non-issues in the world of offline, or brick of mortar, or mortar kind of FDI. So that's one issue. I think that it calls for much more explicit and extensive level of intervention on the side of the international organizations, and that's another theme that we have heard throughout, is the need to, on the one hand, globalization, but of course in parallel with this, with the need to harmonization, and there's something that came up repeatedly again and again, harmonization of regulation on stock exchange, harmonization harmonization of regulation of green technology, green behavior in general, and so on and so forth. Kind of harmonization in order for us to be able to collect data on a global level. So all issues that really, of course, represent important and significant policy challenges. I think I will leave it with that for now. Yeah, back to Sasha, I guess, your turn.
Thank you. Thank you. So you said a lot. So that helps me to set me up. So I think just to add to you and John's observations and your thoughts of today's sessions, I think the two things that really struck me today. Well, actually, there's only one, but it's very multifaceted. So the idea of region as the context to a lot of these SDGs and the role of firms and governments. The reason I'm saying this is obviously region is important because it embeds governments. Now, I remember one thing that really struck me this morning was Jeffrey's note on the role of governments in developing the policies or frameworks for addressing some of the most pressing SDGs. Now, what you highlighted was that, is it really just the firm, or is it more about the governments? Now, especially those developing country governments or low-income country governments, where do they get that funds from in order to actually finance themselves, have the sufficient budgets to actually do that? Now, you can say that firms, for me, yes, firm contributes to that. FDIs contribute to that. But I think that's not enough. That's my kind of observation from it. Now, if we talk about regional developments, the regional governments in this case does not necessarily have the resources, either financial resources or human resources to actually do that. Firms play a role here, but what I'm thinking is that then linking to the last session by AIB on multinationals, and there was this discussion on regional, implementing regional policies. In my work for developed countries, or the countries, the governments, the regional governments that have the resources in order to implement that, it doesn't necessarily work for those that are in the less privileged category. So I think, yeah, so the term region is very neutral, but I think in this context of sustainable development, I think it matters a lot, and there's a lot underpins the role of region or the context of region. So that kind of got me to think, also links to another session today on the fact that post-COVID, the FDI trend has been that there is a lot more regional level investments and policy efforts than actual global level. So what that might mean is that there might be a greater disparity between regions as a result of that. So I think we might see more divergence across regions, and that doesn't necessarily contribute well to the SDGs, to the things that we have been doing in the last decades and years to push forward SDGs. So there might be a reversal in the longer term if region, the idea of region, becomes a driving force for investments, for policymakers. So I think there is more care that is needed in thinking about this regional perspective, either for policy, for research, and for business investment. That was kind of my addition to what Lalaka and John mentioned. So back to somebody.
Maybe you can invite Amelia to comment on our takeaways. Amelia? Oh, you're already here. That's fantastic.
Sorry, I'm running late because I was in our gender panel in our panel on women empowerment and multinational enterprises. I will not attempt to go into discussion of what you said because I think it was very well summarized. I just want to say a few words about the idea of having this session at the WIF, and I'm glad that we have this partnership with ARI, the Academy for International Business, and long-term collaborators like Lilac and John and others, because what we want to have here is a closer dialogue between our different constituencies. Usually at the WIF, we have all our constituencies represented, but sometimes they don't talk to each other. And Ari said something very important yesterday. I'm glad he raised it in the academic panel, in the opening plenary of the academic track, is that researchers have not been quiet or something along those lines. Like we have not been dormant. We have been working, especially through the COVID crisis, the last 10 years since the global financial crisis, trying to find answers to how can we get out of the slump in FDI, how we can deal with GVCs, shocks to global value chains, supply and demand shocks, and so forth. So the idea with this dialogue is to listen to the private sector, to listen to policymakers, and us as academic, try to come up with a research agenda going forward. I'm happy that the issues you mentioned, also the issue of the role of government, the role of firms, the role of regional policies, because this is the type of issues that we try to incorporate in our investment policy framework for sustainable development. So I look forward to the conversations tomorrow and the day after, and to the closing panel. And I don't know if Ari announced it, but our idea is to have these notes posted, but also at the end of the year to have a focus session of the transnational corporation journals, discussing from an international business, from international development perspective, what happened after the WIF, what we as researchers can tell the business community in terms of standards, policies, gender, inclusion, all the development rainbow that we have out there. So I think the 2 days have been very rich. For me, the issue of investing in sustainable development, the discussions that we had with Game Changers was very important. The discussion yesterday from the opening panel, the presidents, the head of state saying, we need to make investment work. It's not only investment, but investment for what? So investment for inclusion. So I think that was a strong message coming. The other issue is the reconfiguration of, coming also from high-level segments, the reconfiguration of global value chains. And we have some countries in Latin America already investing their political capital on this nearshoring phenomenon and trying to promote this as a way of reducing inequalities, reducing migration, and boosting local productivity. And linked to this, an issue that we are going to be discussing tomorrow a lot is the role of special economic zones, of clusters, innovation, and how academia can work better with the private and public sector to address some of these issues in terms of international production. I mean, this is my takeaway. I just came out of the gender panel where we had fantastic insights on the issue of corporate governance, the role of transparency, enforcement, how we can make multinationals more accountable, but also how we can start change from the top, from executive roles all down to the workers at the plant level. So we have such a rich array of issues that we could stay here all night. I mean, this is my takeaway from the last 2 days, and I look forward to tomorrow's discussions. But I just wanted to tell our audience that this is not just a conversation. We are taking it forward, and this will inform our agenda going forward for next year and the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mail. I would like to add something to this, that I think should be on your agenda, if I may. Yeah, it is a direct takeaway of today. Is actually two issues. One idea that I particularly kind of strongly subscribe to is the idea of data collection on global level, which and UNCTAD really, I think UNCTAD has such a fantastic history in doing that, yeah, and I'm honored by being able to take part of that at some part of that under the leadership of Carl Sovan. But there are fundamentals to build on. On taking on the challenge of data collection. It's an issue that came today in the session on FDI technology, and today we're so fortunate to have so much data, and I don't think that we make the most out of it, of what we have, and surely not on the global level. So this is really something that international organizations should, it's a challenge, a challenge and a huge opportunity that international organizations are most suitable to take on. So that's one. The second is again an idea that came from the session, kind of was running throughout the sessions of today, is of market-based policy approaches and market-based incentives. And since Ari mentioned the work that I've been doing on that, so it's really just this week, actually yesterday, a book that I wrote about market-based incentives in global supply chain as a mean to correct for distortion in value distribution in global supply chain just came out, and Ari even accepted the paper of mine for publication in his journal about sort of in a way developing the same theme. But it seems like there are real in a global world there are limits as to how far the traditional regulatory environment can go, and market-based incentives seem to have much stronger appeal to the type of global, largely rational based type of economic activity that characterizes the world today to a large extent. And here again, there's such important role for the international organization to play, and really a role that no country can take on. Yeah, it's really yours. It's your territory, and it's yours to pick it up.
Yeah, to pick up a little bit on the market-driven incentives, Wang Yi also mentioned that they're more attuned, can be more attuned to what's needed locally on there, and thereby be much more effective. So that is something that is a good avenue for research. Something else I've started to think about from the last session as a potential research avenue is how firms act when institutions are failing, and usually in the AIB context, when we talk about institutional failures, it's when there's institutional gaps or things that we try to overcome in developing countries. But with respect to our approaches to sustainable development and climate change, we're finding institutional failures. Well, in the United States, I mean, the government is incapable of doing anything with this. The current infrastructure bill that includes some climate-oriented policy is being held hostage by one particular individual who's not even really seems to be interested in what is necessary for his home state. It's embarrassing, as for a country, that we cannot really move very forward or very actively with climate change. And at the same time that we have found firms increasingly say, we need to do this, we have to do this, it is for our own survival that we need to do this. So I'm curious to see how much individual firms are willing to take on for themselves in some way, either through collaboration with institutions in other countries. In terms of sustainable development, I think that governments in developing countries and other governments are much more focused on what's needed to do that, and are trying to figure out what kind of policies can help achieve that, and apply those to their domestic firms, as well as maybe attach them to requirements for investors coming into those countries. If firms are serious about wanting to actually do something with respect to climate change or sustainable development, theoretically, they would be willing to more easily accept those restrictions on it. And you know, figure out a way, you know, either self-regulate or accept other regulations. So it's kind of, it's thinking, you know, will firms do for themselves, firms from a home country like the United States, will US-based firms be willing to take on for themselves policing and regulating and enforcing environmental and sustainable development oriented policies that the institutions in the United States are unwilling to provide? So I think that would be a fascinating thing for scholars to start looking into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think just to add to, again, your very interesting suggestions, I think for me, as someone who does innovation research a lot, I think for me, and obviously innovation has been discussed throughout today. I mean, it's not just today, it's been discussed since COVID, the role of innovation, technology, acceleration of it, et cetera, But I would be interested to see to what extent, for example, multinationals or firms' innovation efforts actually have a negative effect on sustainable development. As in, apart from the looking nice green patents, what are the implicit, hidden negative effects of developing, say, a green product as a result? Now, if you would take, for example, not to name any particular multinational as a target, but just one of them is Tesla or electric vehicle manufacturers. Now, with that production, obviously you take electricity, and that causes assumption in that respect. So to what degree that compensates the environmental loss? To what degree the quicker recycling of electric vehicles or quick redundancy of electric vehicles actually causes more environmental damage? So in other words, that's just a mere example. So in other words, what about digital innovations? To what degree digital innovations actually causes greater inequality? To what degree that actually causes emotional, social welfare issues, et cetera, So, there's often two sides to a coin, right? There's always a two sides to a coin. So we need to also know not just the benefits of multinationals' innovation activities on books, right? But also what are the hidden consequences, potential negative implications. It's not to say that we can't have it, but we need to know what they are, so that we know what we are losing and what we are gaining. I think that's quite important. And I think that's something that needs more research attention from my perspective. Yeah.
I think Amelia has raised her hand.
Okay, let me try to provoke our scholars here, because I unfortunately missed the first AIB parallel session, full academic session today, because I was speaking in another panel. But do you think that we can really align multinationals in all their dimensions to what we call a new era, a decade of action? Is this a real prospect or is it wishful thinking? You can pick any dimension, whether governance, trade, investment, linkages. Just tell me, do you think we can, as researchers, drive this this question and work on thinking that M&Es can really be part of a decade of change and a decade of action? Sacha, I start with you.
I thought
You're on the spot. I'll follow up.
I can actually maybe start. So
Yes.
and
Sure.
then you guys can agree or disagree with me. So I think that one thing that came out of the previous panel is that yes, there is evidence that regulation can push companies to move towards addressing sustainable development goals, but that cannot be alone. There's also evidence that companies are increasingly, as Bruno Vermoosen would say, adopting a more society-centered view. But again, if regulation doesn't come in, companies cannot do it alone. And even when we started looking at how companies do it and how regulation works, we need to think very carefully about what type of regulations and what type of actions companies can do. And so you see here that suddenly we start bringing in a lot of nuances. What this means is that a forum like the one that we're in right now, where we are bringing together policymakers and business people and academics, where we very rapidly move away from saying, well, is this important or can this be done, towards how can it be done and what nuances do we need to take into account, are really, really important. And I think that is perhaps the main message that I got from the initial panel, that it can be done, but we do have to put the hands together, academics, policymakers, governments, not only local governments, but also international institutions, in order to move this forward.
Thank you, Ari. Your turn to put on the spot the other speakers.
So I think, John, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I think Lilac had her hand up first, so I will defer her to her and then come.
That's very gentlemanlike, John. Thanks a lot for that. I appreciate it. Yeah. Well, Ari, I dare to disagree. I think that, of course, with regulations we can control multinational companies. That's kind of this was not my understanding of Amelia's question. Or Amelia's agenda, hidden agenda, if I may say. I thought that, and I think that this is not what we are seeing. If anything, I think that multinationals find a way to get around the regulations. But they themselves voluntarily adopt many of those targets, that societal targets, and increasingly so. And so now cynics would say that they do this because of a reputational risk and it's window dressing, and there is, of course, an element of that, but behind it there is a real intention and a real recognition that they need to take care of society, and they need to do it at the end of the day for their own benefits, for the benefits of their stakeholders. But in the process, they actually they do a lot of good on a seemingly voluntary way. So if anything, I think that we should try to move away from the traditional regulatory stance that we have always adopted, because I think it's inconsistent with the operation of global world, and inconsistent with the regulatory power of national governments, who are the only one who have actual power to regulate and enforce regulations. Or everything else is soft power and all sorts of things that and move more towards market-based and really soft power and societal pressure in order to bring companies to join in.
You uncovered my hidden agenda.
I'm sorry?
You
What?
uncovered my hidden agenda.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I have another issue for you, but I'll keep it for later. John wanted to speak first.
Okay. Thank you, Lilac. Carl Savant mentioned in his talks about how the regulation is important, but it has to be the right regulation, which means that there needs to be collaboration between the private and public sectors on deciding what that is. And so I don't think we can ever get away from regulation. It just has to be maybe redefined and rethought. But back to Amelia's thing, I think M&Es have to be involved in the decade of action. It's not if, it's if they have to, for anything meaningful to happen. I mean, I mentioned before about the void, institutional voids in some countries, and in willingness to act toward sustainability, and those can be, and the need for firms to be picking up on that, the private sector to be picking up on that. So yeah, like I said, it has to be done. But I also want to touch on something that Sasha mentioned, is that it's difficult. It's very difficult for a firm to be good on everything. The Sustainable Development Goals are highly interconnected. Things that happen in one will have an effect on the other. Climate is highly interconnected. It's a very, very complex system. Firms work in complex systems. So it's very likely that something they want to do somewhere could have a negative consequence somewhere else. Where scholars can come in is to try to help identify where those things can happen, and then start thinking about how to mediate them or ameliorate them, lessen the damage caused from the stuff with, automotive. They want to switch to electric cars. Everybody's talking about switching to electric cars. Where is the materials going to come? Where are the materials going to come from for the batteries? What are the consequences of getting those batteries? Does the extraction cause more pollution locally than is, or what are the consequences of extracting the materials that are needed for those batteries? What happens when those batteries are used up? How do we approach that? Bigger question is, why do we really need lots and lots of electric cars? We have to rethink transportation. What does that imply for the business models of those companies that are involved in transportation? Do we need to think about, okay, what it is that we're doing? And that gets me to thinking about something that Bruno talked about a little bit. And this is this life cycle thinking of a product, is that when something is produced, the producers need to start thinking about what happens throughout its life cycle, from where we're getting the materials, how they're being put together, what happens when they're being used, after they're, a consumer buys them, and then when the consumer is done with them, what happens to them. Consumers have to start thinking about those things as well. Where is this coming from? What have been the consequences of the stuff that goes into that product? Why do I really need it? How long do I really need it? What is necessary for me to consume and what isn't necessary for me to consume? So there are lots of very complex issues that need to get addressed, that the private sector has to sort of incorporate as we deal with these two very difficult challenges of climate change and sustainable development. Companies aren't necessarily very good at thinking about all these, they're good about thinking about the complex issues that pertain to themselves and their own, what goes into making them go. They're not necessarily good about thinking about the consequences of outside the external stuff that's being done. The external consequences of their business models and their supply chains and their actions. Academics are probably the better position to start thinking about those externalities and all those complexities, and working with the private sector, and like I said, identifying where they are, helping to figure out how to deal with them and how best to address them. It's not easy for academics either, because we tend to think too much in silos, but I think that is an important area that academics get involved in to help firms, M&Es, do what they have to do for sustainable development and the environment.
So there is a question from Madeleine Scherp, which is, continuing education is becoming important given the rampant unemployment due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So maybe Sasha, you wanted to say something first, but perhaps after that we can address Madeleine's question, which is also related to the Sustainable Development Goals. But I'll let you first give your point.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Harry. I thought I should just respond quickly to Amelia's question as well, just to say that I think I'm less optimistic in my personal view, that at least about the role of multinationals, just simply because of the nature of animals they are, is very difficult. And, you know, talking about business model innovation as a way to change the way they operate, I think that goes against their fundamental purpose of existence. So my own very humble view is that is not easy. It's very difficult. And I think if it were to happen, it's a matter of interstate collaborations and reinforcements of regulations at regional, global, interstate levels. And that is itself a very complex collaboration, probably the most complex collaboration, given the increasingly volatile geopolitical situation. So I think I'm less optimistic, I have to say. But anyway, just coming back to the question, Madeleine's question on continuing education is becoming important given the rampant unemployment due to, yes, I agree. And I think, but again, I think we need to really put a context to this question, as in the rich countries, yes, the recovery might be, the continuous training might be more available through government efforts and private sector efforts, etc. But I think in the most worstly hated areas, which are the poor countries and regions, I think that would, that is going to be very difficult. In even just providing basic training is being challenging. So I think I agree that this is important, but it's equally very challenging for some regions.
If maybe I can also just jump in here, and maybe also if others have a view on this. So this issue of education is a really important issue. So there is ample evidence that kids who graduate during an economic crisis tend to have a lifetime income that is lower than those that graduate during regular time. So when we have a crisis like what is happening right now that is of a bit longer duration, this is a real issue that we need to be thinking about. Some countries have better systems to deal with this than other countries, but these are the longer term implications that we have not been seeing as much written about as perhaps in other areas, because there are very, very urgent shorter term issues that we're thinking about. But this issue of education and how the graduating class right now is being influenced, and what should be done about education during the recovery of the pandemic period is a very, very important issue.
May I jump in, Ari?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I want to return to Amelia's agenda since she encouraged me to. Yeah, I actually want to go back to a comment that Sasha made earlier about the regionalization of global activity, if you will, and what that means. And I thought I didn't get much sense that this was in the discussion of today, but I think it should be, because it's obviously a development that we are seeing happening in front of our eyes very much. Well, I think there's several issues that have driven it. COVID was one, but I think there are deeper ones, yeah, that regions just tend to be much more integrated than the global world. So in part, this is in a way a reaction to the failure of the international organization to organize a globally functioning world system, particularly the challenges that the World Trade Organization has been experiencing for decades now. But COVID has really sort of pushed this further, and that poses an enormous challenge for the international organization. And I'm wondering, Amelia, or maybe others, what are your thoughts about this, and how, if at all, you're planning to respond to this?
Well, I mean, these issues are, I think, because we are fortunate that we cover different angles. We cover the production, the investment, the finance, and the development and social angles. So, of course, these are issues that we have to answer and to give to approach it from the different, as I said, from those different angles. And so, Heinz said in the chat, I mean, one issue is to go beyond formal regulation. I mean, and issues that also affect this decision-making process. Just to wrap up, I think our agenda on international production goes beyond GVCs. And here we have to go back to the 90s, back to the future, when we started talking about governance models of feminism and how they adapt to the new international system. And this vis-a-vis with what is trade regulation and investment regulation and the whole governance structure. I mean, the governance, global governance has been shifting, reflecting various interests, various development models, various international trade realities and macro realities. But with this, we have shocks, and like we saw last year, we have the COVID, and then now the whole discourse on the role of feminists and how they operate in the global and how they internationalize has to be revisited, especially because of the need to build resilience. Yesterday we asked the question: resilience for whom? For firms, for people, for countries? Is resilience for all, but how we build it and how we make that we do it in a balanced and coherent way, I think is important. Yes. I don't know if I answered your question and I went in different directions.
Yeah. Thank you very
but
much.
I think we cannot be silent and we cannot be blind to those issues from the international organization perspective, especially from the regulatory side. And the investment, national investment regimes and international investment regimes matter more than ever now. So in the World Investment Report, there was an increase in regulations and issues that affected even mergers and acquisitions and other type of relationships.
Thank you.
Okay.
So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amelia, for these words of wisdom. Thank you to Shasha, Zhao, to John Dilliard, and to Lilac Nakum for this first daily roundup. So one of the last words that Amelia indicated was that we should not be silent and blind about new emerging issues. And so you can see that we as academics, we certainly are not silent, and we try not to be blind. And even though we don't always agree, we like to converse with each other, with policymakers and with business leaders to try to understand how we can try to move to a better world. So we did this today with this daily roundup, which is kind of an occasion where people at the World Investment Forum do have the chance to converse with academics. We will be doing the same thing tomorrow. So tomorrow there will be another daily roundup with Sariana Lundan, who is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Business Policy, and Lorraine Eden, who is an AIB fellow. Both are leading scholars in the field, have lots of very interesting things to say about international business, about sustainable development goals, about many other issues as well. So I would encourage you all to join in. And then we do the same thing on Thursday, where you will be joining me and Rob Gross to do another daily roundup. In the meantime, we would like to wish you all a wonderful continuation to the World Investment Forum. There will be a whole list of new sessions tomorrow, and we will see you all soon. Thank you very much.